Welcome to Pain in the Grass, the official Lawn Pride fodcast, where we dig deep into the real problems hiding in your yard. From weeds to grubs to mystery brown spots, we've got the dirt. Let's grow better together.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us right now, it's probably because you're the kind of person who really loves gaining thorough, real-world knowledge without getting totally bogged down in all that information overload.
Right. You want the facts, but you want them delivered efficiently.
Exactly. You want the insights, you want the facts, and you want them in a way that respects your time. So today, we are looking at a stack of notes and source material that you provided to us from a lawn care company called Lawn Pride.
Yeah, specifically, we're looking at excerpts from a guide titled The Henbit Handbook, Managing North Carolina's Winter Lawn Invader.
And right up front, I have to say, the framing of the source material is just a remarkably clever rhetorical device. I mean, it's hilarious.
It really is a unique approach to agricultural writing. Framing an invasive plant management guide as an employee spotlight in a corporate newsletter, it just completely shifts how you perceive the problem.
They treat this incredibly stubborn winter weed like an unwanted employee who basically decided to clock in on your property without even being hired. They even give it a job title.
But unlike real employees, this one is definitely not in line for a promotion.
No, definitely not.
Ah.
It's a funny way to pull the reader in, but it actually serves a really functional purpose too.
It does, because when we look past the joke of, a weed wearing a tiny name tag, we start to see how opportunistic plants actually operate out in the wild.
Right, they don't just appear by magic.
Exactly. They thrive in vulnerable environments. They're essentially applying for a job where there's an open vacancy in the local ecosystem.
And that brings us perfectly to our mission for this deep dive. Today, we're going to decode the biology, the sneaky tactics, and ultimately the complete defeat of this purple-flowered invader.
We're pulling out the exact knowledge you need to understand the ecological dynamics happening right out there in your backyard.
And how to execute a total paradigm shift in how you manage that environment.
Because understanding the biological mechanisms of what is growing around you is the absolute prerequisite to managing it effectively. Knowledge is really most valuable when you can apply it strategically to your own turf.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's officially meet our suspect here. The bio provided lists the common name as Henbit.
And the scientific name is Lamium amplexicol.
Job title, winter annual weed.
With a primary operational window of late winter transitioning into early spring.
Which is a really specific time frame.
It is, and it reveals a great deal about its survival strategy.
Yeah.
But before we map out its timeline, we really need to establish physical identification.
Right.
Managing a landscape requires knowing precisely what target you're evaluating.
So the text gives us some distinct tactile details for identification, starting with what they call the stem test. And this was a surprising physical detail I hadn't considered before.
A square stem.
Yes. Henbit does not have a round stem. It has a square stem. The guide says you can actually pluck one, roll the stem between your fingers, and literally feel the flat sides and the sharp corners.
From a botanical perspective, that square stem is a classic telltale trait of the mint family. The Lamiaceae family.
It's just so strange to think about a square stem.
Well, evolving a square stem provides structural integrity without the need for dense woody tissue. So it allows the plant to put all its energy into rapid, low-level vegetative growth.
Which makes sense for a weed.
Completely. When you feel a square stem on a low-growing plant like that, it immediately narrows down your taxonomic classification.
Which is interesting because when most people think of the mint family, they think of culinary mint, right? The kind spreading aggressively through underground rhizomes and just completely taking over a garden bed. Does Henbit spread that same way? Or is it strictly relying on other methods?
It relies entirely on seed production. It doesn't utilize those rhizomes to spread laterally underground.
Okay.
It functions as a classic winter annual. So it completes its entire life cycle, from germination to seed dispersal to death in a single growing season.
Got it. So aside from the square stem, we also have to look at the foliage. The leaves are described as soft, slightly fuzzy, and kidney-shaped with these deeply scalloped edges.
But the critical visual cue is really how they arrange themselves on the plant.
Right. The leaves grow in pairs, directly opposite each other, and they clasp the stem.
They sit perfectly opposite, hugging that square center. And they often rotate 90 degrees at each node as you move up the stem.
Kind of like a staircase.
Yeah, exactly. It creates this distinct tiered architecture that maximizes the plant's surface area for photosynthesis while keeping its profile relatively low to the ground.
And then there is the crowning glory, the flowers. They are small, pinkish purple, and tubular, and they bloom in these tight clusters right near the top of the plant.
And henbit usually only grows about 6 to 12 inches tall, spreading low across the ground.
Yeah, the guide mentions that when a large patch blooms all at the same time, it casts this faint purple haze over an entire lawn.
And what's fascinating here is the absolute stealth of its growth cycle.
Yeah.
That purple haze is what finally grabs a homeowner's attention in February through April.
Right, they see the explosion of color and just assume the weed arrived overnight.
But the reality is that henbit is a master of flying under the radar. It actually germinates months earlier in the fall. It spends the entire winter growing actively, while the homeowner is completely oblivious to its presence.
So it clocks in during the fall, establishes its baseline operations in the dark of winter, and then hits full maturity in February.
Exactly. It's utilizing those colder months to establish a robust root system and significant vegetative mass.
While everything else is basically asleep.
Precisely. By taking advantage of the fact that landscape maintenance drops to near zero in December and January, it ensures that by the time it flowers in early spring, it's already a fully mature plant that has dominated that space for months.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We need to examine why it chooses North Carolina and why it targets specific lawns over others, because this is a highly calculated biological invasion.
It's not random at all. North Carolina's climate provides an optimal environment for henbit.
Right. The region's cool winter temperatures paired with those consistent winter rains, it creates the perfect soil moisture profile for fall seedlings to establish themselves.
And thrive while other plants are shutting down. But the weather is only half the equation here. The condition of the turf itself is the real catalyst.
Henbit is an opportunist. It targets thin, stressed lawns and bare soil. It zeroes in on areas where the turf grass canopy is compromised.
If we look at the ecology of a lawn in January, there are two massive vulnerabilities that henbit capitalizes on.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, warm season turf grasses are dormant. Because the turf is dormant, its metabolic rate has plummeted. It's no longer actively pulling nitrogen from the soil or expanding its canopy.
Which completely removes the competitive pressure on winter annuals.
Exactly. And second, there is virtually zero mowing pressure, meaning the henbit isn't having its vertical growth repeatedly chopped off by a lawnmower.
So the turf is metabolically inactive, the mower is literally sitting in the garage, and the henbit is just freely expanding. And here is a striking, honestly kind of terrifying horror movie detail from the source regarding its longevity.
It was a seed bank.
Yes. Henbit seeds can remain viable in the soil for several years.
That is a fundamental metric for anyone managing a landscape.
I mean, it means ignoring the plant, or simply mowing off the purple flowers in April and assuming the problem is solved is a massive miscalculation.
A critical miscalculation, because the seed bank in the soil is fully loaded, completely viable, and just prepared to initiate the whole cycle again the following fall.
It's just waiting.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we apply some critical thinking to that seed bank dynamic and the environmental conditions we just discussed, the broader ecological picture really comes into focus for you.
How so?
Henbit is not an aggressive conqueror choking out healthy, thriving turf. It acts as a pioneer species.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. And bare soil is essentially an ecological wound. Pioneer species like henbit are uniquely adapted to quickly colonize those bare, unguarded patches.
So weak turf and dormant grass simply provide the physical space and the unfiltered sunlight the seeds require to break their dormancy.
Henbit cannot outcompete strong grass. It only moves in where the primary vegetation has already retreated.
It just takes whatever territory is left unguarded. Which brings us to the most critical phase of our deep dive, the performance improvement plan. How do we systematically remove this unwanted employee from the ecosystem?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look closely at henbit's biological weaknesses, which the text categorizes under its dislikes.
Right.
To eliminate an opportunist, you must systematically remove the opportunity. And the guide breaks this down into reactive chemical strategies and proactive cultural strategies.
Let's start with the reactive side, the post-emergent control.
Okay.
This applies when you look out the window in late winter and that purple haze is already visible, the plant has emerged, and you need a targeted response. The recommendation is to utilize selective broadleaf weed control.
Yes.
But how is it that a chemical application can wipe out henbit but leave the surrounding turf grass completely untouched?
It comes down to exploiting the fundamental biological differences between the plants. Turfgrass is a monocot, meaning it sprouts with a single seed leaf and has parallel veins.
Okay, and henbit?
Henbit, as a member of the mint family, is a dicot, a broadleaf plant. Selective post-emergent herbicides are often formulated using synthetic auxin mimics.
Auxins.
Auxins are plant hormones that regulate growth. When you apply this to a broadleaf weed, it basically overloads the plant system.
It causes it to grow to death?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
It causes rapid, uncontrolled, unsustainable cellular growth that eventually collapses the plant's vascular tissue. Monocots, the turfgrass, process these chemicals differently and are largely unaffected at the proper application rates.
But the timing of that application is absolutely critical. You have to execute this broadleaf control when the henbit is actively growing, but strictly before it fully matures and produces seeds.
Right, because if it drops seeds into the soil bank,
You are guaranteeing several more years of cyclical invasion.
exactly. That reactive approach is effective for immediate mitigation, but it kind of forces you into a perpetual cycle of chemical warfare,
Right.
which is why the text argues very compellingly that the ultimate solution is proactive, pre-emergent control.
The pre-emergent strategy. This requires a big shift in planning because you're engaging a winter weed in the early fall. The most effective control happens months before you ever see a single purple flower.
It's all about timing.
Applying a fall pre-emergent treatment establishes a chemical barrier within the top layer of the soil just as the temperatures begin to drop. How does that barrier actually function when the henbit seed tries to wake up?
Well, pre-emergents do not prevent seeds from germinating, which is actually a really common misconception.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the seed still absorbs moisture and begins the process of waking up. However, as soon as the newly emerging root tip contacts the herbicide barrier in the soil, the chemical inhibits normal cell division.
So it stops it right in its tracks.
The root cannot grow. The seedling cannot establish a vascular connection to moisture and nutrients, and it just dies before it ever breaks the surface of the soil.
Shutting down the operation before it even gets off the ground.
Precisely. But there is a brilliant analogy used in the text that drives home the ultimate underlying ecological principle here.
The workplace analogy.
Yes, they state, think of henbit like a workplace problem caused by poor management. If conditions improve, the problem goes away.
It shifts the accountability directly back to the property manager, to you, the listener.
It moves the entire conversation away from simply relying on chemical herbicides to actually managing the physical environment, treating symptom versus curing the ecosystem.
How do you cultivate conditions where weeds are naturally excluded?
The text outlines a strict environmental control plan. First, you build a thick, dense turf canopy.
Because a dense lawn naturally crowds out weeds by physically blocking sunlight from reaching the soil surface.
Exactly. If those dormant henbit seeds are trapped in the dark, they lack the solar energy required to sustain germination.
You are literally starving the seed bank of its primary energy source.
And the second step is maintaining precise, proper fertilization. Healthy, actively growing grass competes much more fiercely for available nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium.
It becomes a localized battle for resources down in the root zone.
And the established turf will always win that battle if it's properly supported.
The third step is to overseed thin areas. We established that bare spots are open ecological vacancies, so by actively overseeding, you are intentionally filling those vacancies with desirable vegetation.
Before the henbit seeds ever have the opportunity to colonize the space.
You fill the empty desks with the employees you actually want.
That's a great way to put it. And finally, implementing a structured seasonal prevention program addresses the biological cycles before they initiate.
Rather than constantly scrambling to apply post-emergence after the yard is already covered in a purple haze.
You're fundamentally engineering an environment that is deeply hostile to the weed's pioneer survival strategy.
So what does this all mean? When we distill the strategies presented in this handbook, the central takeaway is a complete paradigm shift in landscape management.
A total shift.
To defeat henbit, you don't simply spray it when it shows up. You cultivate a lawn so physically robust, so dense, and so metabolically active that the weed cannot even secure a foothold.
You change the ecosystem of your backyard to heavily favor the primary turf over the opportunistic invader. You are systematically shifting the balance of ecological power.
Which brings us to our key takeaways for you, our listener. Those tiny pinkish purple tubular flowers might look aesthetically pleasing, but they really function as a highly visible environmental indicator.
A warning sign.
They are a flashing warning light on your lawn's dashboard, indicating that your turf canopy is compromised. Seeing henbit in the spring is your definitive reminder that you need to reevaluate your fall prevention and turf management strategies for the following season.
It is the landscape actively communicating its vulnerabilities to you. And this raises an important question, something I really want you to think about long after this deep dive concludes.
So what's that?
Well, we established today that a single henbit plant's seeds can lie dormant and completely viable in the soil for several years, silently waiting for a moment of structural weakness or a bare patch to strike. It makes you wonder, if you were to look at any patch of bare earth, whether near your yard, a local park, or a forest, what other invisible ancient seeds are sleeping just beneath the surface right now, silently waiting for their perfect environmental opportunity to wake up?
That is a fascinating concept to consider the next time you step out into your yard. Thank you for sharing your source material with us today. We really hope you walk away from this feeling equipped to manage the complex ecosystem growing right outside your door. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay curious until our next deep dive.
Thank you for listening to the Pain in the Grass Fodcast, sponsored by Lawn Pride of North Charlotte, Huntersville, your go-to name in turf care for homeowners and businesses seeking beauty, quality, and reliability, powered by family and fueled by passion. Until next time, make sure to take care of that pain in the grass.